the father of the young woman, and he promised him that he would never get married, and that the first son of his father and that woman would become the king. And still, the father was not agreed. So, and Bismuth made a very strong vow. He said, "I'll never get married. I'll never have any relationship with any woman the rest of my life." So then the father agreed. And when he made that vow, which was a very severe vow because he was young, he was handsome, very powerful, he received the name Bisma, which means that he has made a very severe vow and that he will keep it the rest of life. And he did. But because of that vow, he was put in very difficult situations. And we won't tell the whole story right now, but we're going to read about him directly from the Srimad Bhagavatam, this sacred book that has, which actually it's the graduate study of spiritual life. The undergraduate study is the Bhagavad Gita, and the graduate study is this book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, which takes all the themes of the Bhagavad Gita and expands them tremendously. And the life of Bismadev is an exceptional life, and we're going to hear about it now. So, there was a great and terrible battle called the Battle of Kurukshetra, which took place 5,000 years ago in a place called Kurukshetra, India. And at least 640 million people died in 18 days. It was a terrible battle, the worst battle in the whole history of the world. And there were two sides of the same family that were fighting against each other. It was the Kuru dynasty, who were the dominant kings in the area of Hastinapur, which is modern Delhi today. But their kingdom stretched all over the world. It was not just what we know as modern India. It was the entire planet Earth at that time. They were very powerful kings. And Bismadev was the grandsire of that dynasty. And he was also a pure devotee of Krishna. But Krishna was on the other side of the Kuru family, with the Arjuna and his brothers, the Pandavas. Now, Bismadev had a duty to protect the Kuru dynasty, but he knew that the sons of Pandu, of which Arjuna is one, and Yudhisthira and Bhima and so forth, that they had the rightful claim to become kings. Their father had died when they were still young children, and the guardianship of the kingdom was given to the brother of their father, or their uncle, named Dhritarashtra. But Dhritarashtra was not only blind physically, but he was blind spiritually also. And so he wanted his sons to, and especially his first son, Duryodhana, to be the king. And so he had a soft spot for his own sons. And his son Duryodhana was very envious of the sons of his uncle Pandu, or the father of Arjuna and his brothers. And so Duryodhana tried to kill the Pandavas, and he also several times, and also he tried to defile their wife, Draupadi. So eventually the Duryodhana invited the Pandavas to come to a gambling match, or gambling. Since they were all Kshatriyas, or warriors, a warrior could never refuse to a challenge, either to fight or to gamble. So they were the Pandavas, Arjuna and his brothers, were cheated, and they lost everything, including their wife. And then Duryodhana and Karna and other people tried to strip the wife in public, but the wife of the Pandavas prayed to Krishna, and although they tried to take her sari off in public, Krishna made her sari infinitely long, and they were not able to defile her. Well, this was all extremely insulting and very bad behavior. And this is, but also in that gambling match, not only they lost their wife, but also they were forced to go into exile for at least 12 years, and then 1 year in incognito, where they would have to hide and no one should know where they are. So the Pandavas went through harrowing times. They were harassed always, they were threatened always, there was attempts to kill them, their wife was insulted, but yet they tolerated all of that. And eventually, when their exile was over, they came back, and they had the right to become the kings. The elder brother Yudhisthira had the right to become the king of the Kuru dynasty, and Duryodhana refused. And his father, who was blind materially and spiritually, supported his son. And this is what precipitated this terrible battle of Kurukshetra. Now, Krishna and his brother Balaram and their whole dynasty, called the Yadu dynasty, they were, let's say, closely related to the Kuru dynasty. Krishna's mother was related to them, and which side was Krishna going to be on? This was the question. Well, Duryodhana wanted Krishna's army, which was an invincible army called the Yadu dynasty army. But Arjuna was willing to have Krishna on his side, but Krishna was not allowed to fight. He could only give advice. Now, how did that happen? Well, without going deeply into the details, basically Arjuna wanted Krishna because he loved Krishna and he respected him as his guru, as his spiritual master. And he was spiritual in nature. Duryodhana was a materialist, therefore he wanted Krishna's army. And he thought that Arjuna was actually stupid for choosing Krishna, who cannot fight, over his army. Arjuna had the first choice, but he took Krishna. And Duryodhana thought he made a mortal, fatal mistake, but actually he didn't, as we'll see. So when the battle started, it was very destructive and very lethal battle. The Pandavas, Arjuna and his brothers and Yudhisthira, were far outnumbered by the army of Duryodhana, and there were many, many great fighters, including Bhisma, and the guru of the martial arts that taught the Pandavas and the Kurus how to fight, Dronacharya. They were both on the side of Duryodhana, and they had the Yaduda army, which is huge, and very skilled fighters. So it looked like they were destined to lose the battle. But as the battle progressed, in the beginning they were very confident, but as the battle progressed it became apparent that they could lose the battle. So at one point Bhisma was incapacitated, shot by the arrows of Arjuna. Now, how could he do that? Because Bhisma was actually a demigod. He was not immortal. He was not like the others. And he was actually invincible. But because Arjuna was a pious, not only pious, but very saintly warrior, and very much loved by Bhisma Dev, he explained to Arjuna how he could kill him. And Arjuna took permission from him to kill him. He did, otherwise it would be impossible. Anyway, Arjuna wounds him, and in such a way that he was struck by hundreds of arrows that pierced his body and stuck him to the ground, where he was like a little bit off the ground with all these arrows holding him. And basically, that was the 10th day, and the battle had lasted another 18 days. And Bhisma Dev was stuck in that position that whole time. And then after the battle, the funerals were done for all the dead soldiers. So that took time also. So now Bhisma Dev was stuck like that. And because he was a perfect yogi, even though by the time the Pandavas came to pay their respects to him, he had no more blood or flesh on his body. He was just bone, but still he was alive. Which proves there's a difference between the soul and the body. That Bhisma Dev was able to keep his body alive by not exiting with his soul from the body. He was a perfect yogi. He knew how to do that. So in the last days of his life, the King Yudhisthira came to see him, accompanied by Krishna and many saintly persons and the entire Pandava brothers, and then many great sages and saints from the entire universe came. And at that time, Yudhisthira was in a great quandary. He had learned some things from his mom that if he had known that before, he would not have fought in the Battle of Kurukshetra. But his mother kept a secret. And at that point, Yudhisthira put a curse on all women that they can never keep a secret. So, because his mother, by keeping a secret about the paternity of Karna, who was actually the first son of Kunti Devi, the mother of the Pandavas, but they never knew that Karna was their brother. If they had known that, they would not have fought. But the mother kept that a secret. So, therefore, Yudhisthira was very, very forlorn and frustrated that so many people had been killed just so he could become king. This was all Krishna's plan, but however, no one could convince Yudhisthira to become the king after all the funerals were finished, the battle was finished, they were victorious. So when he comes in front of Bhisma, Bhisma explains to him something called Raja Dharma, the duties of a king. And after hearing that, Yudhisthira becomes convinced that he should become the king and righteously protect all the widows and orphan children and manage the kingdom for the welfare of the people and to elevate them spiritually after such a horrible battle and slaughter. So now we come to this chapter 9 in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it says, Sutta Goswami speaks, being afraid for having killed so many subjects on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Maharaj Yudhisthira went to the scene of the massacre. There, Bhismadeva was lying on a bed of arrows, about to pass away. So, next it says, at that time all his brothers followed him. In other words, Arjuna, Bhima, Sahadev, Nakula, and of course Yudhisthira. At that time, all his brothers, the brothers of Yudhisthira, followed him on beautiful chariots drawn by first-class horses, decorated with gold ornaments. With them were Vyasa and rishis like Domya, the learned priest of the Pandavas, and others. O sage amongst the Brahmanas, Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, also followed, seated on a chariot with Arjuna. Thus King Yudhisthira appeared very aristocratic, like Kuvera, surrounded by his companions, the Guyakas. Lord Krishna wanted the Pandavas to be present before Bhismadeva in the most aristocratic order, so that he might be pleased to see them happy at the time of his death. Kuvera is the richest of all the demigods, and herein King Yudhisthira appeared like him, or was compared to him, Kuvera, for the procession along with Sri Krishna was quite appropriate to the royalty of King Yudhisthira. Seeing him, meaning Bhisma, lying on the ground, like a demigod fallen from the sky, the Pandava king Yudhisthira, along with his younger brothers and Lord Krishna, bowed down before him. Lord Krishna was also a younger cousin of Maharaj Yudhisthira, as well as an intimate friend of Arjuna, but all the family members of the Pandavas knew Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord, although conscious of his supreme position, always behaved in a humanly custom, and so he also bowed down before the dying Bhismadeva, as if he were one of the younger brothers of King Yudhisthira. Just to see the chief of the descendants of King Bharata, all the great souls, meaning Bhisma, all the great souls in the universe, namely the rishis amongst the demigods, brahmanas and kings, all situated in the quality of goodness, were assembled there. So people from all over the universe came to see Lord Bhismadev leave his body. The rishis are those who have attained perfection by spiritual achievements. Such spiritual achievements can be earned by all, whether one is a king or a mendicant. Bhismadeva himself was also one of the Brahmarshis and the chief of the descendants of King Bharata. All rishis are situated in the quality of goodness, all of them assembled there on hearing the news of the great warrior's impending death. So, now, the next couple verses describe all these exalted celebrities, all saintly persons that have come from the universe to see Bhismadev pass or leave his body. Then it says, Bhismadev, who was the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly well all the religious principles according to time and place. So although he's glued to the ground with all these arrows, still he offers everyone that came appropriate words of welcome and praise. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas, or religious preachers or reformers of the world, executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of the time and place. Bhismadeva was one of the 12 great authorities in Krishna consciousness and in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically because he was neither at his home or in a normal, healthy condition, but he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words and hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words, and he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhismadev, and since Bhismadev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. The Lord's omnipotency, or Lord Krishna's omnipotency, or all-powerful nature, is displayed by his simultaneous presence in every place. He is present always in his eternal abode, Goloka Vrindavan, and still he is present in everyone's heart, and even within every invisible atom. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency or the material energy has nothing to do with his eternal form. All these truths were known to Sri Bhismadeva, who worshipped him accordingly. The way to worship Krishna is by explaining his transcendental qualities. So now we have a hint here how Bhismadev greeted Krishna. He spoke about his transcendental qualities. He is simultaneously present in the spiritual world and at the same time present in every atom of the material world as the Paramatma and in the heart of every living entity. Okay, then the sons of Maharaj Pandu were still sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather. Seeing this, Bhismadev congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. So Bhismadev, he had genuine love and affection for the Pandavas, the sons of the brother of Dhritarashtra, led by Yudhisthira and Arjuna and Bhima and Sahadeva and Nakula. When Maharaj Pandu died, his sons were all small children, and naturally they were brought up under the affection of elderly members of the royal family, specifically by Bhismadeva. Later on, when the Pandavas were grown up, whether they were cheated by the cunning Duryodhana and company. And Bhismadev, although he knew that the Pandavas were innocent and were unnecessarily put into trouble, he could not take the side of the Pandavas for political reasons. At the last stage of his life, when Bhismadev saw his most exalted grandsons, headed by Maharaja Yudhisthira, sitting very gently at his side, the great warrior grandfather could not check his loving tears, which were automatically flowing from his eyes. He remembered the great tribulations suffered by his most pious grandsons. Certainly he was the most satisfied man because of Yudhisthira's being thrown in place of Duryodhana, and thus he began to congratulate them. Bhismadeva said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you were protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion." And this is a very significant statement by Bhismadeva. The Pandavas were, let's say, destined to be killed by Duryodhana, but because they were protected by saintly Brahmanas, God himself, meaning Krishna, and the principles of religion that they followed strictly. The number one principle of religion is Acharya Pasamam sakshat, that is, one should accept a bona fide spiritual master and masters, siksha and diksha gurus, to be instructed and also guided through all the travails and situations of life. So the Pandavas had great respect for saintly persons, and they had a guru, and they had gurus. One of their gurus was Krishna himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they were protected by the saintly brahmanas, Krishna himself, and by following the principles of religion. What are the principles of religion? No meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit activities outside of marriage, and always chanting the holy names of the Lord, regularly hearing the sacred scriptures, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and discussing them and explaining them to others, and also eating only sanctified foods called prasadam. Those are the fundamental principles of spirituality and Vedic religion. There are other subsidiary rules, but if you follow those 4 do's and don'ts, you will be transcendental to the influence of the modes of material nature, which means that you'll be a liberated person even in this world, as long as you follow the instructions of the spiritual masters and remain always submissive and respectful in your attitude. So Maharaj Yudhisthira was disturbed due to the great massacre in the Battle of Kurukshetra. Bhismadeva could understand this, and therefore he spoke first of the terrible sufferings of Maharaj Yudhisthira. He was put into difficulty by injustice only, and the Battle of Kurukshetra was fought just to counteract this injustice. Therefore, he should not regret the great massacre. He wanted to point out particularly that they were always protected by the Brahmanas, the Lord, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these 3 important items, there was no cause of disappointment. Thus Bhismadeva encouraged Maharaj Yudhisthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. Bhismadeva, as one of the authorities in the line, wanted to impress this point upon the Pandavas. So this is an instruction for us. If we want to be protected by the Lord himself, then we should always be very respectful of saintly brahmanas. A saintly brahmana follows the rules and regulations of Brahminical life. What are those rules? Samadhamak tapak socham santirajavamevacha jnanam vijnanam sayitam brahma karma swabhavajam. That is, sama. They must be equally disposed toward all living entities. How do you remain equally disposed toward all living entities? And equally disposed in all situations of life, whether success or failure, happiness or distress, by developing the universal vision of seeing Lord Krishna in the heart of every living entity and seeing everything in relationship with the Lord. Nothing is independent of God or Krishna. But due to material education and bad association, we develop the mentality that God is far away and the material world is not really under his supervision, and that we also are independent of God. And with that false mentality, we engage in a life of sinful activity. And that is ignorance. No one is independent of Krishna. And we can never be outside of Krishna's scrutiny. And we're all dependent on the Lord for everything we do. But when, that's why it says ignorance is bliss. When you're ignorant, you forget that. But ignorance is actually the cause of misery. It's not actually bliss. It's the cause of misery. We suffer because of ignorance. And by ignorance, we ignore the principles of Dharma, and we ignore the existence of God, and we engage in sinful activities unknowingly. Unknowingly. I know when I was born into my family taught me to engage in sinful activities. They didn't know it was sinful. I didn't know it was sinful, right? I didn't know it was sinful to eat meat and take intoxicants and so forth, all these things. I didn't know that. I thought it was normal. My parents were doing it, right? And how did I know? How did they know? They also were ignorant, right? So ignorance is not bliss. It's actually the cause of suffering. And I suffered as a kid, I remember. And my parents also suffered terribly. But when I met His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and I began to read the Bhagavad Gita with his commentaries and associate with devotees, I suddenly realized, my God, what a horrible birth I took in a family that was fully ignorant. Now, that doesn't mean I have no respect for my family, or I don't love my father and mother and so forth. Of course I do. But that doesn't hide the fact that we were all living in ignorance. And because of that, we suffered terribly. My father died of cancer. My mother had to work hard her whole life to maintain the family. And, I don't want to give you a history of woe as me, but it was the most fortunate thing for me to meet Srila Prabhupada and come in contact with the Vedic knowledge. So, Bhismanadev said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffered for being the sons of religion personified. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you were protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion." So we should take this hint and be protected also by respect for saintly Brahmanas, or that means priests, and teachers of the Bhagavad Gita, and God, meaning Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and religious principles, the principles of Dharma, as we just explained. As far as my daughter-in-law Kunti is concerned, this is Bhismadev speaking about the mother of the Pandavas. Upon the great General Pandu's death, that's her husband who died, she became a widow with many children, and therefore she suffered greatly. And when you were grown up, she suffered a great deal also because of your actions. So the Kunti Devi was a saintly person. By her whole life she suffered. Her whole life she suffered. And because her sons first of all, she had to raise her sons and protect them from being killed. And then when they were grown up, they were put into exile, and there was many attempts again to kill them. And the whole time she was suffering. But she endured that suffering because of her love for Krishna. She's a great devotee. In fact, there's an entire chapter in the same book, the previous chapter to this one, of her prayers. And those prayers are some of the most sublime prayers in the whole Vedic literature. She's a great saint in Vaishnava history. The sufferings of Kunti Devi are doubly lamented. She suffered greatly because of early widowhood, and to get her minor children brought up in the royal family. And when her children were grown up, she continued to suffer because of her son's actions. So her sufferings continued. This means that she was destined to suffer by providence, and this one has to tolerate without being disturbed. So Kunti Devi is an example of a woman who her whole life suffered terribly, but was able to tolerate that suffering because of her love for Krishna and her knowledge of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, although she was in constant situations of suffering, she was not disturbed. She remained, she maintained her equanimity in all those distressful situations because of her dependence on Krishna and her knowledge of Krishna. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, this is Bismadev speaking, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. So in other words, everyone is born with a karmic history. And that means everyone is born with a mixed bag of good and bad reactions. The bad reactions are reactions for sins committed in previous lives, and the good reactions are reactions due to pious activities in spiritual life, in previous life. Both those reactions, good and bad, force a person to be born again in the material world. So they're both bad. In my opinion, all this is due to inevitable time. There is control by time all over space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable kala, or time, controls even the action of the air and other elements. Everything, therefore, is controlled by the supreme kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Kala means time. Thus, Yudhisthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhisthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequence. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, following the religious principles. These three guiding principles should be the aim of life. One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of that time. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of religious principles. So this is the proof that someone is genuinely religious, is genuinely a devotee. They remain unfazed in happiness and distress, in health and sickness, in fame and infamy, in riches and poverty, in war and peace, etc. They're not disturbed by it, by these dualities of life. What is the symptom that proves they're not disturbed? They continue their service in spite of all difficulties in life. Why? Because they know that Konteya pratijanihi nami bhakta pranasyati. Krishna promises in the Bhagavad Gita to protect his devotees. And this whole history of the Pandavas in the Battle of Kurukshetra is the most poignant example of the protection of God. And the whole theme of the Mahabharata is that virtue will always triumph over vice. If we remain genuinely virtuous, we will always come out victorious. Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhisthira, the son of the demigod controlling religion? Bhisma, the great fighter with a club, the great bowman Arjuna, with his mighty weapon Gandiva, and above all the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. So, the triumph of virtue over vice is proven when a person endures all difficulties and continues their service to the Lord. And for such a devotee, Krishna becomes a special protector and shield. And therefore, the devotee understands this and actually experiences it. Therefore, they're never in fear or anxiety. They have complete faith in the protection and help of Krishna. And Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita. Ananya chintayanto mam ye jana paryapasati tesam nitya bhayuktanam yogishamam vaham yaham. One who is dedicated to me with love and devotion, always thinking of me, I provide what they lack and preserve what they have. So Krishna will make Krishna consciousness easily available to us, and when we begin the life of Krishna consciousness, He'll protect us from falling away from it. And in every instance, He'll provide what we lack and preserve what we have. The bewilderment of Maharaj Yudhisthira over his past sinful acts and the resultant sufferings, etc., is completely negated by the great authority Bhisma, one of the 12 authorized persons expert in Krishna consciousness. Bhisma wanted to impress upon Maharaj Yudhisthira that since time immemorial, no one, including such demigods as Shiva and Brahma, could ascertain the real plan of the Lord. So what can we understand about it? It is useless also to inquire about it. Even the exhaustive philosophical inquiries of sages cannot ascertain the plan of the Lord. The best policy is simply to abide by the orders of the Lord without argument. The sufferings of the Pandavas were never due to their past deeds. The Lord had to execute the plan of establishing the kingdom of virtue. And therefore, His own devotees suffered temporarily in order to establish the conquest of virtue. Bhismadeva was certainly satisfied by seeing the triumph of virtue, and he was glad to see King Yudhisthira on the throne, although he himself fought against him. Even a great fighter like Bhisma could not win the battle of Kurukshetra because the Lord wanted to show that vice cannot conquer virtue, regardless of who tries to execute it. Bhismadeva was a great devotee of the Lord, but he chose to fight against the Pandavas by the will of the Lord because the Lord wanted to show that a fighter like Bhisma cannot win on the wrong side. So that means that our destiny is determined by the choices we make in life. If we choose to back an evil person, not only that person is going to go down, we will go down with that person. So we have to have the determination not to be a partisan of evil people. We must always choose the association of saintly persons and avoid the association of unsaintly or impious persons. Otherwise, whatever happens to those persons will happen to us. So if we follow saintly persons, we will always be protected by Krishna. If we follow the advice of impious people, we will go down with them. Even though we might be sincere in the sense of sincerely following, but because we're following the wrong person, whatever happens to them will happen to us. The Vedic system of acquiring knowledge is the deductive process. The Vedic knowledge is received perfectly by disciplic succession from authorities. Such knowledge is never dogmatic, as ill-conceived by less intelligent persons. The mother is the authority to verify the identity of the father. She is the authority for such confidential knowledge. Therefore, authority is not dogmatic. In the Bhagavad Gita, this truth is confirmed in the 4th chapter, Bhagavad Gita 4.2. And the perfect system of learning is to receive it from authority. So this verse is Evam parampara praptam imam raja sayo vidu sakalina hamata yoganasta parantapa. Krishna explains that this imperishable knowledge of Bhagavad Gita was passed down through parampara, through the disciplic succession, beginning from Krishna to Brahma, to Narada, to Vyasa, and so forth, all the way down to His Divine Grace Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, and to us. This is called the Brahma Madhava Gaudiya Sampradaya. Sampradaya is the lineage of guru and disciple. The original guru is Krishna. His original disciple was Brahma. Brahma's disciple was Narada, etc., coming down to today. So, therefore, we receive this confidential knowledge through authorities. The authorities are the acharyas in the sampradaya. So there's two things. One is sampradaya and the other is siddhanta. Siddhanta means the whole body of knowledge by which a person becomes convinced that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So therefore there are 4 sampradayas representing the same siddhanta. There's the Brahma, Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. There's the Shri Sampradaya. There is the Kumar Sampradaya, and there's the Rudra Sampradaya. So each one of these disciplic lineages begin with Krishna and come down through either Lakshmi Devi, Brahma, the 4 Kumaras, or Lord Shiva. Now, the Rudra Sampradaya, or Shiva's Vaishnava Sampradaya, is different than the followers of Shiva who consider that he is the supreme God. It's different. There is a Vaishnava Sampradaya coming through Lord Shiva to the present, also called the Rudra Sampradaya. Okay, so the very same system is accepted universally as truth. In other words, receiving knowledge from the sampradaya, or the authorities, the acharyas in a certain Vaishnava lineage. But only the false arguer speaks against it. For example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky, and when scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted the modern scientists as authorities. You know, by the way, already people are saying the Chinese didn't actually land on the other side of the moon, on the dark side of the moon, that the whole thing is a hoax. Already they're saying that, right? And here Prabhupada is saying this, he wrote this in 1950s and 1960s. He's saying that, for example, modern spacecraft fly in the sky. Yeah, go ahead. And when scientists say that they travel to the other side of the moon, men believe these stories blindly because they have accepted the modern scientists as authorities. Yeah. No, you say it. Yeah. So Prabhupada is saying here, back in the 1950s and 60s, that this going to the moon is a hoax. They're just stories. But people believe it. Now, this is the main point. Knowledge, as I've explained this many times, knowledge is not what you learn. Knowledge begins when you accept someone as an authority. So some people accepted Hitler as an authority, an absolute authority, and they followed him blindly. And of course, we know the outcome of that. Some people accept Darwin as an authority, and they follow him blindly, thinking that, you know, everything he said is the truth. And that is also a hoax. Some people follow Krishna as an authority, and they follow him. But everything Krishna has said is true, and we can verify that. I've done that many times by giving examples from the Bhagavad Gita. Well, we won't do it now, but I've done it already many times. So, anyway, the proof is the Bhagavad Gita, spoken by Krishna, was spoken 5,000 years ago. There's no other book in this world that's still being read after 5,000 years. The Bible, the Old Testament, is hardly 3,000 years old. The Quran is, the New Testament is only 2,000 years old. The Quran is 1,500 years old. The Buddhist writings are 2,500 years old. See? There's no book in this world like the Bhagavad Gita. And it's still being read, and we're talking about it every day. So, and everything in the Bhagavad Gita that's said in the Bhagavad Gita is true. It was true 5,000 years ago, it's true today, and it'll be true 5,000 years from now. Okay, so now it says, the authorities speak. So knowledge begins by accepting someone or something as an authority, right? Just like when the United States was occupying Japan after World War II, one Japanese kid was always hanging out near one American base, and the American soldiers sort of adopted him, and they taught him English. But they taught him very, let's say, improper English. Hare Krishna. They taught him all curse words, right? So the boy didn't know that. You know, and I don't want to give an example of it, it's too vulgar. But so when he would show someone else that he knows English, when he would speak, they were shocked. It's like a rapper, you know, rap music, they use these filthy words all the time. And he didn't know. He thought it was proper English, right? So see, that's what happens when you accept a wrong authority. You know, so another wrong authority would be the Sarirak Bhasya written by Sankaracharya. Although Sankaracharya is a devotee of Krishna, but he's an incarnation of Lord Shiva. But he was ordered by Lord Narayana to mislead the Buddhists and basically kick them out of India. So in the time of Sankaracharya, the Buddhists were prominent in India due to Emperor Ashoka. And so for about 1,000 years, Vedic Dharma was not followed, or was very subordinate, and it was Buddhism that was the main religion in India. So Sankaracharya appeared to basically kick the Buddhists out of India and reestablish the Vedic authority. But he did it by giving a Buddhist-like interpretation of the Vedas. Buddha, of course, had rejected the Vedas. Sankaracharya reestablished the principle of the Vedas, but he gave a Buddhist-like explanation of them. So, therefore, he wrote this book called Sarirak Bhasya. Now, before you read the Sarirak Bhasya, you're sure you exist, your children exist, your 401k exists, Microsoft exists, the United States exists. After you read Sarirak Bhasya, you become convinced that it's all an illusion, that nothing is real. That's how brilliant Sankaracharya was. He was able to write a book that completely baffled people. See? And but afterwards, Ramanujacharya came, and Madhvacharya, and then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and they completely defeated the Sarirak Bhasya. Although there's still some very, let's say, persistent adherents of Sankaracharya's Sarirak Bhasya, but it was totally defeated and debunked first by Ramanujacharya, then again by Madhvacharya, and then again by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, so knowledge begins when you accept an authority. And if you accept the wrong authority, then you end up like that little Japanese boy, thinking that you know perfect English, but actually all you do is use filthy words in the English language. The authorities speak, and the people in general believe them. But in the case of the Vedic truths, they have been taught not to believe. This was the curse of the British. They took over the educational system in India, and they taught the new generations of highly educated Indians not to believe in the Vedas, to think it's all mythology, that everything is subordinate to the Christian timeline of 5,000 years for creation, blah, 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 all nonsense stuff. Even if they accept them, that is the Vedas, they give a different interpretation. Yeah, the interpretation of Sankaracharya and the Sarirak Bhasya of impersonalism. Each and every man wants a direct perception of Vedic knowledge, but foolishly they deny it. This means that the misguided man can believe one authority, the scientist, but will reject the authority of the Vedas. The result is that people have degenerated. We see that every day. the degeneration of people, not only in America, in India also, in all over the place, every country of the world, due to this modern materialistic education and due to false philosophical interpretations like the Harivilas and other New Age religions and so forth. All nonsense philosophy. It's not philosophy, it's philosophy. It turns people into fools. Here is an authority speaking about Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead and the first Narayana. So this is Bhismadev. Actually, I didn't read the verse. Bhismadev now is beginning his Raja Dharma discourse. He's explaining to Yudhisthira what a king must know in order to be an ideal king. So the first thing he teaches him is Esavai Bhagavan Sakshat Adyo Narayana Pumam Mohayan Mayaya Lokam Gudas Charati Vishnisu. This Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable, original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayana, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni, just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. So he's telling Yudhisthira, he said, this guy sitting right next to me here, he's Krishna, but he is actually, don't think he's a member of your family and one of us. He's not one of us. He's the Supreme Personality of God. He's walking amongst us as if he's one of us, but he's actually the original Narayana. He said, and this is the first thing he teaches them about Raja Dharma. And this is the first thing our children should learn also. They should learn right off the bat, right in the beginning of life, who is God. Otherwise, they'll end up thinking that Gurjit Singh is God. You know who Gurjit Singh is, right? You know who Gurjit Singh is? In India? Yeah. He's in jail right now, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, they'll think people like that are God, just because they can do some trick, They can produce a gold bracelet or something from their sleeve, all of a sudden. Or they give you some basma, some ashes from a fire sacrifice. All of a sudden your business does better. That means he must be God. That's a bunch of nonsense. Here is an authority speaking about Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead and the first Narayana. Even such an impersonalist as Acharya Sankara, or Sankaracharya, has said in the beginning of his commentation on the Bhagavad Gita that Narayana, the personality of Godhead, is beyond the material creation. Yes, so he quotes, this is the Gita Bhasya by Sankaracharya. In the introduction he says, Narayanaha parovyaktad andam avyakta sambhavam andasyantas tvime loka saptadvipa chamedini. This is the Bhagavad Gita Bhasya by Sankaracharya, and he says that Narayana, the personality of Godhead, is beyond the material creation. In other words, he's not subject to the material creation. Although in the Harivilas Prabhu, he's implying that Narayana is also under the influence of the material nature, right? But here, and also he said, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, Bhaja Govinda, Mudamate. Give up all your speculations, just surrender to Govinda. Actually, he didn't say that Narayana, he didn't say in the Harivilas Prabhu that Narayana is subject to the material nature. He implied that Krishna, when he appears in this world, is under the influence of material nature. He implied that. The universe is one of the material creations, but Narayana is transcendental to such material paraphernalia. Bhismadev is one of the 12 Mahajans who know the principles of transcendental knowledge. His confirmation of Lord Sri Krishna as being the original personality of Godhead is also corroborated by the impersonalist Sankara. All other acharyas have also confirmed this statement, and thus there's no chance of not accepting Lord Sri Krishna as the original personality of Godhead. Bhismadeva says that he is the first Narayana. This is also confirmed by Brahmaji in the Bhagavatam, 10th canto, 14th chapter, 14th verse. Krishna is the first Narayana. In the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, there are unlimited numbers of Narayanas, who are all the same personality of Godhead and are considered to be the plenary expansion of the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. The first form of Lord Sri Krishna, the first form of the Lord Sri Krishna first expands himself as the form of Baladeva, and Baladeva expands in so many other forms such as Sankar's son, Pradumya, Aniruddha, Vasudeva, Narayana, Purusha, Rama, and Nishinga. All these expansions are one and the same Vishnu Tattva, and Sri Krishna is the original source of all the plenary expansions. He is therefore the direct personality of Godhead. He is the creator of the material world, and he is the predominating deity known as Narayana in all the Vaikuntha planets. Therefore, his movements amongst human beings are another sort of bewilderment. The Lord therefore says in the Bhagavad Gita that foolish persons consider him to be one of the human beings without knowing the intricacies of his movements. So that is a verse in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter. Avyakta avyakta apanam manyate mam abudaya param bhavam majananto mamavyayam anuttamam. So Krishna speaks to Arjuna and he says that 7th chapter 24th verse of Bhagavad Gita, unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. So, Krishna says that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Brahma says he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhisma Pitama says he's a Supreme Personality of Godhead. Arjuna says that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 10th chapter, verses 12 and 13. Arjuna says, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam, Purusham Sasvatam Divyam, Adi Devam, Ajam Vibhum, Ahustva Tvam Vishaya Sarvir, Naradasta, Devala Naradastata, Asita, 1 second. Asito Devalovya Sa Swayam Chaiva Bravasime. Arjuna said, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate abode, the purest, the absolute truth. You are the eternal, transcendental, original person, the unborn, the greatest. All the great sages, such as Narada, Asita, Devala, and Vyasa, confirm this truth about you, and now you yourself are declaring it to me. So many Mahajans are declaring that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. Yes. No, when it says Vasudeva with a long A, it refers to Krishna, and it also can refer to Narayana. Let's see. Okay, the first expansion of Krishna is Balaram. Then from Balaram comes the first Chatur Vyuha. The Chatur Vyuha is made of 4 Narayana forms, or Vishnu forms, right? There's Sankar, San, Pradumna, Aniruddha. And then there's the second Chaturvyuha. And after the second Chaturvyuha is Vasudeva, who is non-different than Narayana. Okay, so there's this progressive expansion of the Lord, and then from the second Chaturvyuha, you have the Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, right? for the expansion of the material world. Those are Narayana forms within the material world, and in the material world they're called Vishnu. Okay. So that Vasudeva is referring to that, in that particular context, is referring to a Narayana form in the spiritual world.
Okay. In the 7th chapter, 19, is that Vasudeva?
No, that's Krishna. That's referring to Krishna. Yeah. So, one word can have different meanings, right? Like, for example, you say Atma. Atma has 3 meanings. It can mean the soul, it can mean the mind, and it can sometimes even refer to the body. It depends on the context. Okay. Okay. The bewilderment. The Lord therefore says in the Bhagavad Gita that foolish persons consider him to be one of the human beings without knowing the intricacies of his movements. The bewilderment regarding Sri Krishna is due to the action of his twofold internal and external energies upon the third one, called the marginal energy. Now this is an extremely important point. It's a very subtle point. I'm going to explain it in a second. The living entities are expansions of his marginal energy, and thus they are sometimes bewildered by the internal energy and sometimes by the external energy. By internal energetic bewilderment, Sri Krishna expands himself into unlimited numbers of Narayanas and exchanges or accepts transcendental loving service from the living entities in the transcendental world. And by his external energetic expansions, he incarnates himself in the material world amongst men, animals, or demigods to reestablish his forgotten relation with the living entities in different species of life. Great authorities like Bhisma, however, escape his bewilderment by the mercy of the Lord. So in the spiritual world, he can expand himself into unlimited forms of Narayana and accept the loving exchanges with his devotees in Vaikuntha, right? Huh?
Is that inconceivable nature of simultaneous presence?
Yes, yeah. And in the material world, he can expand himself into different avatars. Some of them are animals. He expands himself into every species. He's not just the father of all human beings. He's the father of all living entities. And he establishes a forgotten relationship with the living entities in different species of life. So great authorities, like for example, when he appears as Matsya Avatar, right? He's a fish. He also appears as Kurma Avatar, a big turtle. He appears as Varaha Avatar. It's a boar. People say, how can that be God? Right? But devotees are not fooled by that. And he appears not only in those avatars, he appears in every species. And there's 8,400,000 species. So it's just a source of bewilderment for people. They can't imagine that anyone can do such a thing. O King, Lord Shiva, Narada, the sage amongst the demigods, and Kapila, the incarnation of Godhead, all know very confidentially about his glories through direct contact. Okay, we're going to skip a few purports to come to where we want to come to. O King, that personality whom, out of ignorance only, you thought to be your maternal cousin, your very dear friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger, benefactor, etc., is that very personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Lord Sri Krishna, although acting as the cousin, brother, friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger, benefactor, etc., the Pandavas, was still the supreme personality of Godhead. Out of his causeless mercy and favor upon his unalloyed devotees, he performs all kinds of service, but that does not mean that he has changed his position as the absolute person. To think of him as an ordinary man is the grossest type of ignorance. Being the absolute personality of Godhead, he is present in everyone's heart. He is equally kind to everyone, and he is free from the false ego of differentiation. Therefore, whatever he does is free from material intoxication or inebriety. He is equally balanced. Yet despite his being equally kind to everyone, he has graciously come before me while I am ending my life, for I am his unflinching servitor. The personality of Godhead who appears in the mind of the devotee by attentive devotion and meditation, and by chanting of the holy name, releases the devotee from the bondage of fruitive activities at the time of his quitting the material body. So this is a very important verse. So if we fix our mind on Krishna, then he appears really, practically in our mind, and especially by chanting the holy name of the Lord, Hare Krishna, and he purifies us of all our previous karma. May my Lord, who is four-handed and his beautifully decorated lotus face, with eyes as red as the rising sun, is smiling, kindly await me at that moment when I quit this material body. So although Krishna is standing there in front of him with two arms, right, in his Shyam Sundar form, but yet he prefers, and that's his personal preference, to see the Lord as Narayana. Right? It's a preference. Arjuna prefers to see the Lord in his original form of Shyam Sundar. Sutta Goswami said, Maharaj Yudhisthira, after hearing Bhismadev speak in that appealing tone, asked him, in the presence of all the great rishis, about the essential principles of various religious duties. So then there's a description of everything about Raja Dharma that Bhisma Pitamaha explains to Yudhisthira. So then we fast forward. While Bhismadev, this is verse 29 now, text 29. While Bhismadev is describing occupational duties, the sun's course ran into the northern hemisphere. This period is desired by mystics who die at their will. So now, this is Makara Sankranthi. Bhismadev was waiting for this day. The perfect yogis or mystics can leave the material body at their own sweet will at a suitable time and go to a suitable planet desired by them. In the Bhagavad Gita 8.24, it is said, the self-realized souls who have exactly identified themselves with the interest of the Supreme Lord can generally leave the material body during the time of the fire god's effulgence and when the sun is in the northern horizon, and thus achieve the transcendental sky. In the Vedas, these times are considered auspicious for quitting the body, and they are taken advantage of by expert mystics who have perfected the system. Perfection of yoga means attainment of such super mental states as to be able to leave the material body as desired. Yogis can also reach any planet within no time without a material vehicle. The yogis can reach the highest planetary system within a very short time, and this is impossible for the materialist. Even attempting to reach the highest planet will take millions of years at the speed of millions of miles per hour. This is a different science, and Bhismadeva knew well how to utilize it. He was just waiting for the suitable moment to quit his material body, and the golden opportunity arrived when he was instructing his noble grandsons, the Pandavas. He thus prepared himself to quit his body before the exalted Lord Sri Krishna, the pious Pandavas, and the great sages headed by Bhagavan Vyasa, etc., all great souls. Thereupon, that man who spoke on different subjects with thousands of meanings and who fought on thousands of battlefields and protected thousands of men stopped speaking, and being completely freed from all bondage, withdrew his mind from everything else and fixed his wide-open eyes upon the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who stood before him, four-handed, dressed in yellow garments that glittered and shined. So Krishna is manifesting his form as Narayana specifically for Bhisma Pitamaha. And we'll read this purport and end for today. We'll read two more. In the momentous hour of leaving his material body, Bhismadeva set the glorious example concerning the important function of the human form of life. The subject matter which attracts the dying man becomes the beginning of his next life. Therefore, if one is absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, he is sure to go back to Godhead. without any doubt. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 8, chapter 8, verse 5 to 15. And whoever at the time of death quits his body remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. Therefore, Arjuna, you should always think of me in the form of Krishna, and at the same time carry out your prescribed duty of fighting. With your activities dedicated to me, and your mind and intelligence fixed on me, you will attain me without doubt. He who meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, Arjuna, is sure to reach me. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental is beyond this material nature. One who, at the time of death, fixes his life hair between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkara and who are great sages in a renounced order enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. So this is the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. These are all verses. Bhismadeva attained the perfection of quitting his body at will and was fortunate enough to have Lord Krishna, the object of his attention, personally present at the time of death. He therefore fixed his open eyes upon him. He wanted to see Sri Krishna for a long time out of his spontaneous love for him. Because he was a pure devotee, he had very little to do with the detailed performance of yogic principles. Simple bhakti yoga is enough to bring about perfection. Therefore, the ardent desire of Bhismadeva was to see the person of Lord Krishna, the most lovable object, and by the grace of the Lord, Sri Bhismadeva had this opportunity at the last stage of his breathing. So here we see, in the case of Arjuna, he wanted to see the universal form of the Lord. He really didn't want to see it, but he purposely asked to see that, so that in the future, if anyone claims to be God, then, like Arjuna, they can ask that so-called God to manifest his form as Virat Rupa. So he sees the Virat Rupa, his hair stands on end, and he's actually frightened by it. So he says, my mind is getting disturbed, my Lord, please change your form into your Narayana form, your forearm form. So then Krishna changes back to Narayana. And then he says, but actually, my Lord, I want to see you as Manasam Somyam, your beautiful human-like form. So then finally Krishna changes back into his original form as Shamsundar. Now in the case of Bhisma, although Krishna is present in his Shamsundar form, two-arm form, Bhisma's preference is to see Narayana, and the Krishna in the form of Narayana. So he manifests himself as Narayana for Bhisma Pitamaha. This proves, it went both ways now. For Arjuna, he wanted to see Virat Rupa, but then he gets frightened by it and he says, show me your Narayana form. And then he says, but actually I want to see your most beautiful form as Shamsundar. In the case of Bhisma Pitama, he's seeing Krishna in his two-arm form, but his preference is to see him as Narayana. Why? Because as Narayana, he ran at him with the wheel of Arjuna's chariot and using that as a chakra, right? And because Bhisma has this particular rasa, it's called the chivalric rasa. He's a warrior. And he fought against, in fact, he shot arrows at Krishna and wounded him, right? But Krishna accepted those arrows as like little pinpricks of love, So in that chivalrous, let's say, rasa, he prefers to worship the Lord in his Narayana form. Because when Krishna kills demons, he manifests the Narayana form. But Bhismadeva is not a demon, but he fought against him. And it was, when Krishna chooses his opponents, let's say it like that, it's just like, you have a boxer practicing for a championship boxing tournament. Well, he practices with other boxers, right, for the big fight. So Krishna also, whenever he fights, one of his devotees appears as a demon. Just like Jaya and Vijaya, they fell down the world for 3 births as demons. So Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu, and then Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and then Sisupala, and what was the other one? Dantavakra, I think. Yeah, anyway, these were 3 births of Jaya and Vijaya, so that they could return quicker. Krishna gave them the choice, either 3 births as demons or 7 births as devotees. They said, we'll take 3 births as demons because we'll come back quicker. So, okay. So, then the last verse, the last 2 verses. By pure meditation, looking at Lord Sri Krishna, he at once was freed from all material inauspiciousness and was relieved of all bodily pains caused by the arrow wounds. Thus, all the external activities of his senses at once stopped, and he prayed transcendentally to the controller of all living entities while quitting his material body. And now will follow a whole bunch of glorifying prayers of Bhismadev right before he leaves his body. And these prayers all explain the transcendental qualities of Krishna. That's a real prayer. Bhismadev said, "Let me now invest my thinking, feeling, and willing, which were so long engaged in different subjects and occupational duties, in the all-powerful Lord Sri Krishna. He is always self-satisfied, but sometimes, being the leader of the devotees, he enjoys transcendental pleasure by descending on the material world, although from him only the material world is created." And then he says, Sri Krishna is the intimate friend of Arjuna. He has appeared on this earth in his transcendental body, which resembles the bluish color of the tamala tree. His body attracts everyone in the 3 planetary systems, upper, middle, and lower. May his glittering yellow dress and his lotus face, covered with paintings of sandalwood pulp, be the object of my attraction, and may I not desire fruitive results. On the battlefield, where Sri Krishna attended Arjuna out of friendship, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hoofs of the horses. And because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Sri Krishna. So see, he has this chivalrous relationship, one of the rasas. Yeah, it's called a secondary rasa. It's not a primary rasa. And then next verse he says, in obedience to the command of his friend, Lord Sri Krishna entered the arena of the battlefield of Kurukshetra between the soldiers of Arjuna and Duryodhana, and while there, he shortened the lifespans of the opposite party by his merciful glance. This was done simply by his looking at the enemy. Let my mind be upon that Krishna. See, Bhismadev is an authority on Krishna consciousness. So he's explaining why Krishna and how Krishna entered the battlefield. And then he says, when Arjuna was seemingly polluted by ignorance upon observing the soldiers and commanders before him on the battlefield, the Lord eradicated his ignorance by delivering transcendental knowledge. May his lotus feet always remain the object of my attraction. Fulfilling my desire and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel, and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way. May he, Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. On the battlefield he charged me as if angry because of the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows. His shield was scattered and his body was smeared with blood due to the wounds. At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction be to Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his right hand and a bridle rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means, those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death. Let my mind be fixed upon Lord Shri Krishna, whose motions and smiles of love attracted the damsels of Rajadama, the gopis. The damsels imitated the characteristic movements of the Lord after his disappearance from the rasa dance. At the Rajasuya Yagya sacrifice performed by Maharaj Yudhisthira, there was the greatest assembly of all the elite men of the world, the royal and learned orders. And in that great assembly, Lord Shri Krishna was worshipped by one and all as the most exalted personality of Godhead. This happened during my presence, and I remembered the incident in order to keep my mind upon the Lord. Now I can meditate with full concentration upon that one Lord, Shri Krishna, now present before me, because now I have transcended the misconceptions of duality in regard to his presence in everyone's heart, even in the hearts of the mental speculators. He is in everyone's heart. The sun may be perceived differently, but the sun is one. Sutta Goswami said, thus Bhismadev merged himself in the Supersoul, Lord Shri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with his mind, speech, sight, and actions, and thus he became silent and his breathing stopped. Shri Bhismadev Mahajan Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi Haribol.
Even though you use the word merge, but that just means that...
No, merge means he was thoroughly meditating on the Lord. That's samadhi. It's not that he becomes the Lord or merges impersonally into the Lord. His mind is completely focused on the Lord. Right? It's transcendental.
This is great, bro.
Yeah. I have a question. Why do you always come late? Oh, okay.
So Prabhu, you said that Kunti Maharani, she could have avoided that war,
Yes.
but she still let it happen. So I don't know, somehow I had the question.
Yes. What question?
Why did she, did she take side of one side then? Did she take, I don't know how to articulate it, but somehow she took side of Yudhishthira, five partners rather than third.
No, she kept the secret. That's why women can't keep secrets anymore. They've been cursed by Yudhisthira not to be able to keep a secret. Look what happened. Jeff Bezos' new girlfriend, right? She revealed all their secret discussions to a friend of hers, a man that she knows. And then he leaked it to all the newspapers.
Oh,
Did you know that?
I didn't know the whole
Yeah.
context.
No, I mean, now they're writing all these ridiculous things that he wrote her,
Yeah.
and pictures that he sent. They won't show the pictures because they're too filthy. But the text, all the text he sent her, was leaked to the newspapers. How did it get there? He only sent it to her, right? She sent it to a man, friend of hers, right? And then he leaked it all to the newspapers. So women can't keep secrets. Look what happened. Kunti kept the secret, and you know, if the Pandavas knew that Karna was their brother, they would not have fought. That's what Yudhisthira told her.
Does that mean it was Krishna's plan that this question struck? Of course it was Krishna's plan, but it's still very hard for a mother to take side of one side and...
She didn't take anybody's side. Why? She loved Karna as much as Arjuna.
Effort to reach him before the war.
She tried to, she went and begged him. And he told her, he was very clever, he said, you will always have 5 sons. When he implied that he was going to kill Arjuna. But she would always have 5 sons. She has 6 sons, right? But he said, you will always have 5 sons. He promised her. That means that he was hell-bent on killing Arjuna. Yeah. if you read the Bhagavatam, then you understand so many things, and you can avoid so much trouble. Right?
Just going to what Mahajan has mentioned, like this, all the philosophy
Yeah.
in terms of how to actually apply.
But the whole philosophy of Raja Dharma is there. We skip those purports. Right? The whole philosophy, how to be an ideal king, is there. And plus, he taught the Vishnu Sahasranam Sotram also. So
this was also part of the Mahabharata. This whole episode is also in Mahabharata.
So what Vyasadeva did is he extracted from everything he wrote, and from the Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, Mahabharata, Vedanta Sutra. But now he focused on Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whereas if you read all those things, you don't read Srimad Bhagavatam, you read all those other scriptures, you're confused who is God. It's not clear. He spent more time explaining Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha than explaining who Krishna is. Right? So therefore you think that, the purpose of the Vedas is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. But actually the purpose is Vedaischa Sarvir Aham Eva Vedya, is to understand Krishna. So therefore he wrote Srimad Bhagavatam as his most mature understanding of the philosophy, of Vedic philosophy. And he begins it with Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Right? So this word Vasudeva and Vasudeva, they can have different meanings in the context. You have to be able to understand what the context is. Otherwise you'll make a mistake.